Hey everybody, I'm Mr. Price. Thank you for checking out Back to School Night. I know it's not the back to school night that most of us would like. I much prefer to be in front of you guys tonight and talking to you a little bit about history, about the class, about the activities, and take your questions and those kinds of things. So we will just do what we can here. Again, I'd like to thank you for coming out tonight. A little bit about myself. Again, I'm Mr. Price. I've been teaching here for 30 years now. I just got my certificate in the mail that thanked me for 30 years of service. It's kind of hard to believe. My kind of specialty is American history. I've taught ninth grade American history since I started. I also teach advanced placement American history, a lot of world studies, and I've also taken on sociology this year, which I happen to really enjoy. I thought I would, but I do really like it as well. So thank you for coming out tonight. A little bit more about myself, my personal life. I do live in near Lidditz. My kids go to Warwick. I have two boys that are now at Temple. One's a senior and one's a freshman, and I have a senior at Warwick High School. So kind of like local. In my spare time, I love fly fishing. I love reading history. I've coached a lot of my kids' sports, and I really enjoy that. And I'm currently coaching a Lidditz rec basketball team, so that's a lot of fun. So let's talk a little bit about the class. I'm going to present my screen now, and what I'd like to do is I'm going to share my syllabus with you. I don't want to just read a lot of this to you, but I do want to point out some things that we're going to do this year. We're picking up American history around 1900. So I know one of the tough things is as a history teacher is to cover what you're supposed to cover. Technically speaking, eighth grade teachers are supposed to get up to 1900, and we pick it up at that point. Over 30 years, I've added 3 decades of history that I have to teach, but luckily, eighth grade is now covering up to 1900. I did want to point out that they will get a decent amount of specific economics instruction. They'll learn a lot of basic economics. They'll build on that in world studies next year, and then have even more advanced economics in 11th grade. So they kind of get economics at Calico if they don't take an elective through 3 classes. Politics will do a lot with the different political parties, different ideology and beliefs, 3 branches of government, separation of powers, impeachment, amending the Constitution. They'll get a lot of that this year. And also social life, society. I love teaching things like art, poetry, music, and things like that, how people live during various time periods. I think that's what really catches the attention of a lot of students. We will do a lot of basic skills along the way. We'll do a lot of different types of reading. I know I have nonfiction reading that they're going to do. We have historical fiction that they're going to do. They read the textbook. We do a lot of primary sources, all those different kinds of things. So they will get a lot of reading this year. Writing, we do some paragraph writing, a couple 5-paragraph essays. We'll also do some document-based questions where they will use some historical documents to help them write a 5-paragraph essay. They will do a speech on the 1920s, and they'll have some other opportunities to talk in front of the class, which of course they all love to do. And we're going to try to make every attempt to infuse critical thinking into the classroom, and also making the history that we're studying relevant to today. Like every lesson I try to say, here's how this plays out today, or see how this is going on today. And things that we're going to talk about, like for instance, tariffs and political corruption and economics, all those kinds of things we can really connect to today. There's my basic setup of how they're graded, about 40% on tests and quizzes. The end of most chapters or modules, that they will have a chapter test. They always get a review sheet. They're working on a study guide as we work through the chapter. They usually get Quizlets at the end to practice. We do some Kahoots, and they get a lot of stuff to kind of back up the content that they have to know. And that kind of gives you an idea of where we're at there. I'm going to skip kind of the regular classroom rules and let's go right to the content because I wanted to show you a little bit about what each unit looks like. The first unit we do, or they call them modules, is Module 5 on progressivism. So that's kind of like 1890 to like 1920. So we'll talk a lot about why a lot of change came about. We'll talk about urbanization and industrialization and how things changed so much that progressives looked for trying to fix the problems that were out there, in some cases through government, and sometimes through new ideas about efficiency, all those kinds of things. And we'll trace it through Presidents Roosevelt, Taft, and Wilson. Module 6, we move on to foreign policy. So we'll look at the rise of imperialism around the world, the question of what role the United States would play. We don't get a big war. We get the splendid little war, the Spanish-American War, in that chapter. We'll look at America expanding its power and territory around the world through those three presidents again, because it's kind of the same time period. The wars that we study, whether it's World War I, World War II, Vietnam, Korea to a lesser degree, we look at the causes, how the United States eventually became involved, about war preparation in the home front, the battles that go on and how the war was won, and then finally the peace. And you can see that's how it played out in World War I. 1920s, big on oftentimes called the Jazz Age, but we're going to look at a contrast of times as well. Republican presidents, booming economy, the car, anti-immigrant feelings in the 1920s, a big debate between urban and rural America, which we seem to be having a replay of that debate today. Prohibition, a debate over religion, evolution versus creationism in the schools with the Scopes trial, changing roles for women as a result of getting the right to vote, and we'll take a look at the Harlem Renaissance and jazz as well. Chapter 9 or Module 9 is the Great Depression. We'll look at the debate over the causes, how it affected Americans, how President Hoover tried to deal with it, which according to many people is not very well, although we're going to try to reclaim his views a little bit. A transition into President Roosevelt, which he's going to try to use a lot more government involvement to try to fix things, and we'll talk about the issues over whether that was the right approach or not, but we will talk about the impact of the New Deal over history and how things like minimum wages, maximum hours, protections for workers came about during this time period, and those, it really is a legacy because most of those things have not changed. All right, there you got WW2, causes of the war, dictators, the fall of Europe, the Holocaust, America moving away from isolation into action, especially as a result of Pearl Harbor. We'll look at the home front, Japanese internment, fighting the war in Africa and Europe and Pacific, and finally the end for Germany, Japan, the atomic bomb, and the legacy of war. Module 12, the big battle between the United States and the Soviet Union known as the Cold War. That chapter kind of deals with just the Soviet issue over about 50 years of time. Module 13, post-war boom. We look at the 50s, under especially the end of Truman and 8 years of Eisenhower, some change in culture, issues about poverty, those kinds of things. And then Kennedy kicks off the 60s. We'll talk about his domestic policies, his assassination, Johnson's Great Society, and a lot of the legacy of that, things that we have today that people think are good, things we have today that people think are bad, the changing Supreme Court, and the growth of counterculture starting in the end of the 50s into the 60s. There we have Module 15, Civil Rights, Plessy versus Ferguson, Brown versus the Board of Education, MLK, Malcolm X, the two big victories, Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And we'll look at the challenges of riots in the late 60s, the rise of feminism. Then we have our Vietnam War. You can kind of see some of the things we'll hit there. Transitions and conservatism. So we'll look at the end of the 60s into the 70s with Nixon, Ford, Watergate, Reagan's rise in 8 years in office, in which conservatism is victorious at least for those 8 years, and 4 years after with President Bush, and then we'll hit some of the new ones. So just gives you a quick idea of kind of the things that we'll be covering. So that's the syllabus. You can find that online at any time, and I think that's about it as far as content goes. So I do want to keep the communication lines open. They do get a lot of things graded, so you will see a lot of grades there. Encourage your students to communicate with me. It's certainly an environment where the communication line should be open, and anytime you have an issue, please talk to me if there's something that's not getting done, or something you need to draw my attention to. And I think we'll have a good year. I'm excited here as we have full classrooms again, and I feel like I can get up in front of my classes and actually, engage and discuss history with them. So again, thank you and have a great night.